Number 10. A car crash. Let's start with the drama here. Pretty sure if you say you're an astronaut, people are going to look at you differently. In a good way. Man, you've been to space. After all, you are a human being who has seen just how small the world is compared to the wide universe. Many revere James Donald Halsell Jr. after the 5 space shuttle missions he took before retiring in 2006. But he must have hit the ground hard when he came down to Earth. Halsell was traveling in his car to West Monroe, Louisiana and stopped at a Motel 6. While there, he downed 3 glasses of wine before heading back on the road, which is a no-no. Therefore, tragedy struck. James crashed into a car, killing 2 of the young passengers in the vehicle who flew from the car when they crashed. He was going extremely fast and reportedly tried to steal a bystander's car when he stopped at the site. James told police that he didn't remember leaving the hotel or how the crash occurred. Though they found no drugs at the scene, police did find 10 empty sleeping pill packages back at the room. NASA declined to comment about the arrest. Very sad. Number 9. A love triangle. This one? Oh my god. This next one is pretty rough. We all know what it's like to go through a breakup. It's not fun. It sucks. It doesn't necessarily bring out the best in you. Mother of 3 and mission flight engineer as well as crew member on the 13-day shuttle mission, Lisa Nowak was a prominent figure in NASA's astronaut team. She was even the inspiration for Natalie Portman in the film Lucy in the Sky before she went all breakup song on her ex. In February 2007, Lisa drove from Houston to Orlando, Florida, wearing diapers, so she didn't have to stop, to confront the woman who she claims stole her man. She claimed she was going to have a calm conversation, but instead she ended up attacking her. She was in a wig and a trench coat and there was pepper spray. It was a whole ordeal. William O'Fallon and Nowak trained together and began an affair in 2004. Both divorced their partners, with Nowak thinking her future was with William. Wrong. William started exclusively dating Air Force Captain Colleen Shipman, and he thought Nowak took it well when he told her. Instead, she ended up sneaking into his apartment, read their email exchanges, and well, flash forward to a 900-mile drive, pepper spray, and nightmares Shipman will have for the rest of her life. Initially arrested on the attempted murder charges, they were dropped to less aggressive accusations like attempted burglary and kidnapping. Shipman and Bill are now married, while Nowak, after years of counseling, is doing much better, though she refuses to talk about the event for obvious reasons. I hope you're doing better. Number 8. Married to his work. NASA ended up wanting so little to do with this guy that they actually fired him. Today, divorce is about as common as breakups in high school. Though some happy news, it looks like the percentage is going down, but in the 60s, getting divorced was a major taboo. NASA's astronauts were about the closest thing to comic book heroes the world had ever seen, and they knew that public opinion was a huge part of their funding. So, when an astronaut hero misbehaved, NASA wasn't going to stand for it. Don Easel wasn't exactly a faithful husband, and he rarely visited his son, who was dying of leukemia. He also cheated on his wife multiple times at Cape Canaveral, which was flooded with eager groupies. He gaslighted his wife several times when she asked him to admit it, and when she suggested going to therapy if he thought she was crazy, he replied, "But I'll lose my job." Don and Harriet at last divorced, and NASA soon followed, firing Don as well. Bye, Don. See you later. Number 7. The Astronauts' Wives Club. Not a fun time. Speaking of astronauts behaving badly, let's talk about the reports of the Astronauts' Wives Club. These lovely ladies were used to a measly military pay when suddenly they became celebrities overnight, and given the aforementioned squeaky clean image NASA wanted to protect, any scandal was swept under the rug. According to the Astronauts' Wives Club, a true story by Lily Copel. On the outside, they were the ideal Stepford wives, apple pie baking, apron wearing beauties. But out of the 30 astronaut marriages from 1961 to 69, only 7 would stay married. The biggest wedge in the marriage was the time the men spent at Florida's Cape Canaveral, which I previously mentioned, which became off-limits playground. Cape Cookies became the name of the women who would magically appear to have their own rockets launched by the men who would touch the stars. To handle the silence and stress, the wives turned to excessive ways to self-medicate, the nightly gin and tonic with a tranquilizer garnish. Yeah. Pretty rough. Number 6. Fireflies. Ice particles, they said. Part of the capsule heat shield, they said. Could it have been that John Glenn saw something else instead? Glenn was the first American astronaut to orbit the planet in 1962. He was also one of the good ones. He and his wife Annie were married for 73 years. In fact, when he left to fight in World War II, he told her, and I quote, "I'm just going down to the corner store to get a pack of gum," to which she replied, "Don't be long." He said that every time he went away to war. She kept a gum gum wrapper in her purse every time after that. Anyways, grab a tissue, that's super cute, let's continue. Glenn, while flying over Australia, saw strange floating mass like tiny little stars outside the Friendship 7 capsule. When he tapped on the window, they flew off. Mission Control were at first concerned the anomalies were fragments of the heat shield, but that wasn't the case. No, it was something else. NASA has since explained the sighting as ice particles, but up until his death in 2016, Glenn never really believed it. His wife Annie finally joined him at peace, passing away due to COVID complications at the age of 100 in May 2020. Number 5. Space music. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the first song played in space was Jingle Bells on the 16th of December 1965. It was broadcasted during NASA's Gemini GA spaceflight. Though there have been several musicians played out there in the big space ever since, there remains an artist unknown. Eugene Cernan in the Apollo 10 space capsule reported hearing a strange kind of music during a mission. What he described as a strange musical whistling sound, like how you would imagine space music to be, like the I can't do it. Just imagine very sci-fi. He reached out to NASA Mission Control to see if they'd heard it too. According to the mission transcripts released in 2008, the sounds were recorded. Of course, alien theories have spread far and wide, but NASA made no comment. Then, in the Apollo 11, Michael Collins recorded hearing the same sound while orbiting the moon. This time, NASA was prepared. They said it was, and I quote, interference between the LMs and command modules VHS radios, unquote. Sure it was, NASA. Sure it was. Number 4. Bright lights and beyond. It might surprise you to learn that not only do we have a ton of garbage down here on Earth, but a ton of space junk sits just above us. In fact, the estimate for just how much is staggering. Around 128 million pieces, about 6,000 tons of space debris in space. Earth's low orbit carries millions of rocket and spacecraft fragments along with dead satellites. Each one is flying around 18,000 miles per hour, so faster than a bullet? Yeah. So the likelihood of astronauts encountering space debris is pretty high, but this one example is pretty staggering. But that doesn't stop this case from being very strange. Brent Jett was in the STS-150 mission in 2006 on his way to help construct the ISS. But then he noticed, and I quote, some kind of reflective structure, unquote, outside the shuttle. According to him, quote, it doesn't look like anything I've ever seen outside of this shuttle, that's for sure, unquote. NASA took control of the camera and there were 3 bright objects in the sky. When they ordered an inspection of the craft, they saw nothing. Not even a hint. Space junk or aliens? NASA has no explanation and they won't talk about it, so what is it? And heading on to our top 3, number 3, the Gordo UFO. I suppose it's not too hard to guess that Major Gordo Cooper was a lover of all things space, but it turns out that his adoration goes deeper than that. In 1957, 30-year-old Cooper was test pilot and project manager of the fighter section of the Experimental Flight Test Engineering Division at Edwards AFB in California. 2 members of his crew one morning mentioned to him that they caught sight of a strange saucer-like object. It apparently didn't make a sound as it landed and took off. The 2 men took photos of the craft and Cooper was ordered to have the film developed, have no prints made, and send it right away to the Pentagon. He was also instructed not to look, but like of course he did. He saw exactly what the 2 men described and to his very deathbed insisted the government was covering it up. But not only that, on his 1963 solo trip, he had a close encounter that was broadcasted on NBC. He saw a glowing green object approaching and it was picked up on radar. But when he got to Earth, he wasn't allowed to talk about it. Number 2. Edits in space. Could NASA be editing the footage sent down from the International Space Station? This theory is hot among conspiracists. The idea really started to gain traction in July 2016. 2 different cameras 25 hours apart spotted a distinct square shape, larger than the Earth. Initially, UFO hunters concluded that it had to be some kind of unidentified object in our orbit, but another theory surfaced, that the shapes were actually attempts by NASA to edit something else out. Could it be meteors or a cover-up of something NASA has determined we are not ready to see yet? NASA was forced to deny that they didn't attempt a cover-up, but UFO hunters will never rest until the truth is revealed, even if it has been already, so we don't really know what's true. And last but not least, the Reich and NASA. Well, this is a surprising little tidbit, but honestly, I'm not too surprised. This is definitely worthy of being number 1, especially since NASA doesn't advertise it really at all. During World War II, the US recruited the help of over 1,600 German yacht Yahtzee scientists. Yes, I said Yahtzee because apparently YouTube gets scared, they are Death Eaters. Anyways, they hired over 1,600 German Yahtzee scientists in institutes like NASA to increase their payroll. The code name for this operation was Operation Paperclip because of all the paperclips on the immigration files, which brought in Werner von Braun and his V-2 rocket team. The former SS officer would become a US citizen and was a key architect in the Apollo program. What? In 1977, he was awarded the National Medal of Science despite having previously hand-picked slave laborers in Buchenwald for his rocket building efforts. Yeah, so that's special.
At number 10, we have green and shiny. Gordon Cooper was doing one of the most amazing things a human being has ever done. He was completing a 34-hour orbiting flight around the planet. This was in May of 1963. I can only imagine he saw parts of Earth that most people only dream of. But during this flight, he didn't just get an amazing view and some awesome pictures for Instagram. Also, that is the future of space travel. Influencers are going to go up there and take a bunch of pictures in zero gravity, and then space is going to become a fad for all of the people who want to post it all over their social media. But anyways, during this flight, Gordon Cooper was approached by a green orbiting light that floated up to him in his spacecraft and then flew away. He was so amazed by this encounter that he talked in front of the UN, and he said that I believe that extraterrestrial vehicles and crews are visiting our planet from other planets. Hey, this guy has been to space. If anyone knows, it's this guy. At number 9, we have incorrect. Do you guys know Chris Hadfield? You probably should, baby. He's got a master class. If you do it, they let you go to space. But here's one occasion where Chris was relaying information to the Russian Mir space station so they could dock on his ship. While this was happening, his sensors that tell him how far the station is started giving him the wrong information. This is terrifying to see because if they come in too slow, they won't latch, and then they'll just be both floating out there in the void of space. And if they come in too fast, then they crash and everyone dies. One sensor was telling Chris that they were 32 feet away, and another one was saying that they were 20 feet away. He thought that at least one of them had to be right, so he used his thumb to judge the distance and a stopwatch to judge the speed, and then realized that they needed a touch more speed and got the connection perfectly. Now this is all very nerdy stuff, but that is one of the most bad boss thug life things I have ever heard of in my life. The station weighs 250,000 pounds, and the connection they have to hit is the size of a DVD player, and he eyeballed it. Well, now I gotta take his masterclass. At number 8, we have Leroy's Lights. Leroy Chow is a former commander of the International Space Station, which is one of the coolest titles I have ever heard in my life. While he was working up there, he witnessed something very strange. He saw a line of lights floating through the sky like it was some sort of formation. He said it looked like a grouping of UFOs flying in formation. He also said that it would be ridiculous to think that we are alone in the universe. And if he says that, it's gotta mean something, right? At number 7, something fell off. In 1991, Musa Manarov was on the Russian space station. He was watching a nearby shuttle do a very standard docking, and he decided it would be a good thing to get on camera. I mean, why not? How often are you up in space? Might as well take a few pictures to savor the moment. Now, what he did not expect to see was a little item fall off the spacecraft. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking it was just a piece of the ship detaching or something, but the shuttle was already latched. There wasn't any movement that should have jostled something loose from the spacecraft, and then this mystery item fell directly from the ship down towards Earth. It didn't float in space, and it's all on camera, so you can check it out for yourself. At number 6, we have Vlad and the Little Finger. In 1981, Vladimir Kolvanyuk was on board the Russian space station, and he took a peek out of one of the windows. He saw something strange. He said it wasn't really a UFO, but just a little small object. Even if it's just a little finger-sized device, because it's supposed to be space. There's nothing out there. Well, he watched this thing for a moment, and then it exploded. Maybe it was shy, I don't know. But it seemed that it wasn't some piece of debris or rock or something. There was something in it that made it explode. Maybe it was a UFO, just a very tiny one, or maybe it was some sort of surveillance device and exploded upon its own discovery. Whatever it was, it's gone forever now. At number 5, we have, was it just a reflection or something real? James McDewitt was in space in 1964, and he saw something that he couldn't explain. There was something floating out in space. He said it looked like a ship, but it was in the shape of a beer can, and it was glowing white. Now, when you hear something like this, you think aliens, and that's what all the press thought too when they heard this story, and they ran it. Years later, he reviewed reviewed some of the footage and he said what he saw was just a reflection. Now, what do you think? Could this have actually been something out in space and the government told him to keep his mouth shut? Or was it just a reflection? And number 4, we have toxic ammonia. Okay, this list is teaching me that astronauts are some of the coolest people around. Bob Kerman was on the International Space Station installing a bunch of upgrades. You gotta keep that station looking good. Now, while he was out in space doing this, a valve blew and sprayed ammonia all over his spacesuit. And this is very bad because if he brought it back into the station, everyone would suffocate and die from the ammonia fumes. So he used his big brain. He floated out in front of direct sunlight because ammonia has a very low boiling point. This would burn the ammonia off of his suit. Another astronaut came out and then brushed his suit off, and everyone were mass breathing oxygen upon his re-entry just to be safe. Now look at the big brain on Brad. I mean, Bob. I meant to say Bob. Bob. And number 3, we have what is that noise? Seen or heard? They're two sides of the same coin. One being a little scarier than the other, but just reading this story really freaked me out, so I had to throw it on this list. This was back in 2003. China would launch Yang Liwei into space. Now, it wasn't just the trip of him being blasted in a rocket into the vacuum of space that was scary, although the sounds of a roaring rocket ripping through the sky must be pretty terrifying. It was what happened after Yang got aboard the space station. That night he was there and he heard something very strange. There was a knocking coming from outside the space station. Now this is messed up for a lot of reasons. First, it's the vacuum of space. There shouldn't be anything floating around outside in space, and if there was, it shouldn't be alive long enough to knock. And the second reason, being even spookier than the first, it's the vacuum of space. It's the same reason as the first. Sound needs something to pass through so you can hear it, like air or water. As the old saying goes, in space, no one can hear you scream. So how could this have happened? Could this have just been something in the station that was making a weird noise? Maybe something was floating around loose and bumped against a wall? I don't know, but he heard it more than once. And number 2, we have the space eel. This sounds like the title of a cheesy horror movie that was made in the 1950s. We're gonna take two things we don't understand and put them together, and then you got a movie. Well, it's actually what Story Musgrave saw. He was an astronaut working with NASA, and one day while floating around through the endless void, he saw something very strange. It was a long white space eel. He said it had its own propulsion system to move through space. That sort of discredits anyone who thinks it was just some sort of inanimate object. And that kind of thing does happen. Things fall off of spaceships and space stations and they will just be debris out in the open, just loose and going. And if the propulsion system wasn't enough to convince you, he said he saw this thing not once, but twice. And for the number 1 spot, we have the moon landing visitors. I don't care what you think about the moon landing. If you believe in it, cool. If not, cool. Leave me alone in the comment sections, I don't care. But for the believers, when Neil Armstrong and his crew landed on the moon, there was a lost transmission that Neil sent out when he stepped foot onto the moon, and it went like this. These babies are huge, sir, enormous. Oh my god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here, lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us. End quote. Apparently, there were 2 massive spaceships that were floating above them as they stepped out onto the moon. Now, this transmission was never released into the public until years later, and Neil didn't talk about it until right before he died. So if you don't believe in the moon landing, I guess this is a cover-up on a cover-up.
Starting us off at number 10 is the knocking. On a voyage to space back in 2008, Yang Liwei became the first Chinese astronaut to venture into space aboard the Shenzhou 5. On the night of October 16th, Yang had a very peculiar sound coming from outside. It sounded like someone was knocking. The sound sounded like an iron bucket being hit with a wooden hammer. The scariest part of it all was that the sound wasn't coming from the inside of the spaceship and it wasn't coming from the outside, which makes no sense because space is a vacuum and you can't hear anything. Noise literally doesn't exist. Sound waves need a medium like water or air to pass through, so how did that even happen? Riddle me that, yeah? What makes this whole thing even weirder is that astronauts aboard the following Shenzhou 5 and 6 missions heard the same knocking. So was it a mechanism on the Shenzhou spaceships that caused this knocking to be heard? I don't know. I ain't a damn astronaut. Coming in at number 9 are space snakes. So this one comes from Dr. Story Musgrave, a man who has 6 academic degrees, was part of the Marine Corps, is a physician and mathematician, and he's a bloody NASA astronaut as well. Oh, and he shares the record of most space flights ever taken. So I mean, this man has literally lived 9 lives in one. Like, save some jobs for the rest of us, I swear to God. I'm just trying to get by at this point. Either way, a story said on 2 of his missions, he saw something out there that he doesn't have an answer to. He saw a snake sort of thing. It was 6 to 8 feet long, it was rubbery, and it had internal waves inside of it. And it sort of just followed him for an extended period of time. He claims that being in space makes you see things you'd never imagine. Well, no and that he believes that there are creatures out there much more developed than any of us. And I mean, they've been out there for 100 million years. I'd hope as hell they're advanced. More advanced than us. But honestly, my theory on the snake is that they're just alien devices that just roam space and detect spacecrafts in the area and sort of tail them and send that information back to the alien HQ that deployed it, back to planet Blark. At number 8, we have decompression. So anytime a vessel goes on a voyage to outer space, the changes in atmospheric pressure the astronauts experience can be highly dangerous unless they're doing all the procedures correctly. The year was 1965, Soyuz 11 was re-entering Earth's orbit, and 3 crew members on board ended up dying when depressurized. A technician on the vessel back in Houston said while they were in the vacuum chamber, he accidentally depressurized his own spacesuit and then lost consciousness. He said the last feeling or sensation that he remembered was the moisture on his tongue beginning to boil. Rapid decompression is so serious, the symptoms can include vaporizing blood, swollen flesh, exploding eyeballs, and ruptured lungs. Can you imagine how screwed up the situation is when the moisture on your tongue is boiling? Say less. Also, do you guys like my nail color? I love it. Filling on number 7 slot is the green sighting. So Gordon Cooper is an astronaut that's flown the Gemini 5 and the Mercury 9. He was also the last American to ever spend time in space alone. In May of 1963, he was doing a circumnavigational trip around the Earth on the Mercury capsule, and when he was passing Perth, he saw something. A massive green glowing object came straight for him at a speed he'd never seen before. It was real, it wasn't just illusion, and the Machi tracking station in Western Australia even picked it up on their radar, so it was very much real. Cooper reported it to NBC, but when he landed was told they couldn't question him about it. So that's just another thing that they won't tell us. I feel like we should honestly start rioting until governments all over the world stop keeping from us. I'm over it. I've had enough. Now, at number 6 is the alien music, which unfortunately cannot be found on Spotify or Apple Music, so you guys just don't even bother trying to find it. Just don't. Now, back in 1969, 4 days after we stepped foot on the moon for the first time, astronauts John Young, Tom Stafford, and Gene Cernan were on the far dark side of the moon. And as Mufasa said to Simba, we don't go there. Now, the 3 men were just chilling on the moon, taking pictures of the craters and drinking some grape juice, when they started hearing a strange, otherworldly sort of noise inside their headsets. The music continued for a good hour, and none of the men had heard these types of sound before, and knew no one would believe them if they told. They tried to find out where or what the music was, but they simply couldn't. Decades later, the mystery was just never solved, but some claim it was just sound coming from radio interference between spacecrafts. Which I get, but how would 3 seasoned astronauts not know what that sounded like? Surely they would have heard that a billion times before as well. Why the hell you lying? Why the hell you lying? I made it PG. Coming in at number 5 is the Millennium Falcon, not to be confused with the one in Star Wars. While watching the ISS NASA live feed back in 2016, Jaden Beeson said he saw a metal spaceship. He said the UFO that he saw seemed similar to the Millennium Falcon found in Star Wars, so he realized he definitely needed to take a screenshot to prove what he was seeing. The metal craft had a blue glow to it and stayed hovering above Earth for about 2 minutes. And it's very clear to see it's not even a small craft by any means, you can definitely see it. Either way, Jaden sent the image to NASA, but he's never gotten an explanation or a response back, which makes the whole thing even that much more suspicious. All these craft just hovering above Earth and they're just going away? Why? Come in, you guys. We're friends. At number 4 is the cigar. A bit of background so you know how credible this really is. Musa Manarov was a Soviet-Azerbaijani astronaut who holds a record for the longest continuous time spent in space. That record, 541 days. So he's had a lot of experience being in the Black Abyss and seeing everything. One day in 1991, he was on his way to the Mir space station when something caught his eye. On camera, he caught 2 minutes worth of footage of what appears to be a cigar-shaped UFO. It's just floating, lighting up at certain points, spiraling in every direction, and just actually there. But many say that it's hard to tell whether something is close or far away from you in space since you literally have no frame of reference. So So you also can't tell how big or small it is. So this cigar could be bigger than Earth, or it could be smaller than me. We don't even know. Musa vehemently denied it being space junk because he's seen space junk many times and this ain't it. And considering he holds the record, I say we trust the man. He sounds credible. Filling a number 3 slot is Major Vladimir. Now, Major General Vladimir Kovalyonok was a cosmonaut in the 80s who saw something bizarre during the Salja mission. They were moving over South Africa when he saw an oval-shaped object. Now, initially it flew straight, but then an explosion of golden light occurred. A few seconds later, the oval object transformed into 2 golden spheres. After that, Vladimir just saw white smoke and the spheres just disappeared into thin air. He said he tried to take a picture of it, but it exploded before he had the chance. When he reported to Mission Control, it was all over Soviet headlines, magazines, newspapers, and most people excluded any option of it being extraterrestrial, but it did happen. It has no explanation whatsoever, and it was seen by not 1 but 2 people, Vladimir and his partner Viktor Savinykh. I hope I said that right. Savinykh. Now at number 2 are the other craft. So we all know about Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon and the whole leap for mankind spiel, but that was not the full story. According to Maurice Chatelain, the retired chief of NASA communications system, Armstrong saw things when he got off the spacecraft. Seconds before he stepped down the ladder, he saw 2 massive UFOs hovering above him, and Edwin Aldrin even took pictures of them. That was followed by 2 minutes of radio silence because one of the television cameras overheated and then lost reception. How very convenient. During those 2 minutes, there was a critical lost transmission, and that was Armstrong saying, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here, lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." And that was never made public. It was never even included in any of the records, and he refused to talk about it until his death. Thankfully enough, people had corroborated the evidence that we do know to be true, and I love how this massive part of history that has this whole other side to it we just didn't get told. I'm angry, I'm annoyed, but I wish Neil had told us because this is just shocking behavior on his part. Shocking. And finally, at number 1 is the check mark. Back in 2005, American astronaut Leroy Chiao had been the commander of the International Space Station for about 6 months at that point. One day he was installing some antennas 230 miles above Earth when something caught his eye. He saw the sequence of strange lights that seemed to be in a line that looked like an upside down check mark. Not Nike, it's not just do it. It's definitely not. And the formation flew by him and he was just flabbergasted at what the hell he had just seen. Skeptics tried to convince Leroy that what he had seen was just lights of boats reflecting upwards, but a reflection of lights is one thing. You know when something has its own life and it's moving past you. Reflections only move if the thing that's being reflected is moving, which they weren't. Riddle me that.